I think and believe that we will be reviewing some things. So I know not everyone has been here for that, so I think we'll be reviewing a few things as well.
Yes, so of course we don't have everyone here, so I do have some handouts, and I'll be passing these out here in a few minutes, but we'll also leave them out on the table for those who are not here to be able to take those home and read. But we started a couple years ago with a Covenant Living series, and I used a book, In the Name of God, Amen, written by Dan Ford, as a template. And there's a lot of good things in there. If anyone's ever interested in a book like that, I recommend it. And anyway, so we started off with basic things and worked our way up through some of the foundational aspects of covenant theology. And our whole goal is to learn about covenant theology and practical implications that come from it. So for today, since we've had a long break from it in the afternoons, and it's not something I get to do every week, it's only something that we do on occasion, I always have to be reviewing what we've covered. So to start out, let's just begin with some basic questions of what does it mean to live as a Christian in this world? How does our faith affect our daily living and future goals? Or to be more general, what are we doing here? What does our faith mean for the future? The future of our families and society and individuals in the world. There's many questions that can come up when we talk about the topic for today. And so we're going to use this time for review, but for some it might be new material. And so because of that, if there's any questions, hopefully later on in this lesson time or even after our service is over, feel free to discuss it with me, and or if you have any other questions that I can cover in the future, let me know. So we're talking about covenant theology and practical implications that come from it. So this is something that is an interest to me because of a desire to live my life with a purpose under God for His glory that benefits others. That's kind of a somewhat of a motto, is that there's a desire to live under God's authority and according to His rule for His glory in a way that also benefits others. I think this is a basic principle of Christianity, and it's something that I fail at, and many others would admit the same. But one issue I think we are dealing with today is that, especially with younger folks, seems to be this attitude of not thinking past now, today, or what's right in front of us at any given moment. And part of the problem with that attitude, or where I think it comes from, is that we have a problem with golden ticket, easy believism in the American church. And so we get saved by saying a prayer and going to church, and we secure our golden ticket for Willy Wonka's heaven adventure, and then we wait out through the rest of our life holding on to that ticket and wait for our turn in the glass elevator so that we can get our ride in the sky. And so that's kind of what I think most American Christians are doing, even if they wouldn't phrase it that way. And so once Americans are converted, it seems like we have babies rolling around on the ground for years and years. And there's no maturity, there's no growth, there's no vision, there's no detailed aspects to our understanding of what we're supposed to do with our lives. And so, part of the problem is also the church isn't teaching sound doctrine, and Americans tend to be slow. And so, we see this in our everyday lives. I see it at work. And I have occasional talks with a young man who's under my leadership at work, and I'm glad for that. He's learned a lot and has come a long way, and it's probably his first real career-minded job that he's had in his young adult life. And so I pray that he would be converted and walk through these doors someday. It's a young man that I get to have conversations with. Sometimes it's lighthearted and quick, and we're in a work environment, but every now and then we get to talk about more important issues. And so I'm hoping it's a benefit for him, but it's also been a benefit for me because he's 23, 24, and he's a typical Indiana young person that is exposed to all the media and the games and the social networks and so forth. He knows what's trendy and relevant, you see, and I'm kind of already starting to lose the whole desire to be trendy and relevant, and he's looking at me like I'm not trendy and relevant anymore. And so I don't argue with that. I'm just like, yeah, from my perspective, why do I need to be like you? And, it's an interesting dialogue that we have. And so sometimes I poke fun at what is trendy and relevant. And for instance, I'm getting off. But for instance, he has one of those gizmos with the Jolly Rancher flavored vapor. It's a juice. And so every now and then he'll take this dropper and he'll pour the juice in, and then it heats that stuff up, and you inhale it. And the exhale is like, if you're in a car, a police officer would pull you over right now because it just goes everywhere. And, but then, much to your surprise, you get up there and it would smell like a Snapple drink. And he's inhaling this stuff into his lungs. So I give him a hard time about things like that. I'm like, it's got nicotine in it, and it's like, there's handmade cigars they make down in South America that are just amazing. But Jolly Ranchers, I don't get it.
Totally childish.
Yes. Yeah, so there's trendy and relevant stuff. But here's the thing. Here's what I'm learning. Is he has no vision for his life. Except to work and get experience and live day by day, survive, and just do life, experience life. That's it. And that's not even a summary of what he believes. And that's it. And that's as shallow as it is. And so there's no detailed ambition of I'm gonna go from A to B and through this way, and all these areas of life are important and governed by this standard. Okay, there's no standard, and so it's just day-to-day plumbing through life. And I don't want to sound too negative because at least he shows up to work every day. He's a law-abiding citizen, and he's learning, and generally has a positive attitude. And so I'm not here to just beat up on younger folks or what have you, but there's certain things that he's missing out on. And of course, he's missing out on Christian faith. He's missing out on salvation, forgiveness, and reconciliation in Christ. And so that's huge. That's important. But there's greater implications than even saying that, because millions of quote-unquote American Christians will confess about finding forgiveness or a new life. But at the same time, just as James said this morning, there's no difference. There's no difference between this young man I work with who has no vision for the future and many American Christians. You know, they got the golden ticket, and that's all they have. They don't have a vision to serve the Lord. And so, I want to live as a changed man, and I want to help change the world. And I believe we're to let our light shine before men, and I want all of us here to live like we have been changed and help change the world for the glory of God as God's kingdom advances. And so we might be living in places that no one else in the world knows exist. Mooresville, Franklin, Whiteland, or Martinsville. Most people in the world, or even in the United States, have not heard of these places. But this is where God has us, and this is where we should serve the Lord in our spheres of influence. And so what we're going to talk about today is a framework of understanding that I believe helps us understand our relationship to God, our relationship to one another, and gives us a right mental picture so that we can have a fuller view, fuller understanding of how to serve the Lord and act responsibly in His kingdom. And so, let me give the handout, or Red can. He's the official designated handout person. And if there's any extras, we'll put them up front. I'm going to go through this thing, so I'm not going to miss anything on here. So if you want to just hold on to it or follow along, that's fine. And then you can have it for your record at home. And of course, like I said, if you have any questions, jot down a note or come see me and we'll figure it out. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on this by any means, but it is something that I'm prepared to go over today, and I think it will be a help. So, the first thing we're going to do is, this is more of a recap of things that we've already covered in several other lessons. I don't know how many lessons we've had, probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 lessons over the past couple years. And these are some things that we've covered, and I might not have worded them exactly like this, but as going back and making a summary of these things, these are statements that I felt confident in covering the ground that we have. So the first thing is the definition of a covenant. And this is from the old Webster's Dictionary from 1828. And it's really pretty good. It's something I could see being in a seminary situation. And so let's read this. A mutual consent or agreement of 2 or more persons to do or forbear some act or thing. A contract, stipulation. A covenant is created by deed in writing, sealed and executed, or it may be implied in the contract. A writing containing the terms of agreement of contract between 2 parties, and so forth. And then it goes on, in theology, the covenant of works is that implied in the commands, prohibitions, and promises of God, the promise of God to man, that man's perfect obedience should entitle him to happiness. Example, this do and live, that do and die. The covenant of redemption is the mutual agreement between the Father and the Son respecting the redemption of sinners by Christ. And then you have the covenant of grace, is that by which God engages to bestow salvation on man upon the condition that man shall believe in Christ and yield obedience to the terms of the gospel. So there's your definition right from the dictionary, and I think it's really good. And so you can look up in some of your resources and books at home what others have said about what a covenant is, what covenant means in theology in the Bible, and you should get a similar answer that you find right here. So the next point is that there are three covenantal institutions of God's created order. And so what I mean is that all three of these have a specific covenantal structure, and all three have representative governmental forms. And so what we've done here is put them down here as A, B, and C, the home, the church, and the civil government. And so one of the ways we designate them as a covenantal institution is by the specific covenant that you find in each one. So the home is designated by the marriage covenant. The church is designated by the church covenant, and the civil government is designated by a constitution. And if you know anything about American history, going all the way back to the Mayflower Compact, you have a covenantal framework and compact that you see in our history all the way up through the state constitutions, or the colonial times, the state constitutions, and even in the more national sense. And so you see there in the definition that you have a mutual consent or agreement of two or more persons to do or forbear some act or thing, a contract or stipulation. So we see the home, the church, and the civil government have all of these forms. None of these institutions are in vertical hierarchy to each other, but rather horizontal, with Christ being the ultimate head over all. The church doesn't rule the state, and the home doesn't rule the church, and so forth and so on. However, there are distinct spheres of responsibility with each institution. For example, the church is the ministry of grace and truth, while the state wields the sword as a ministry of justice, and the home is a source of primary or basic education and training for life in the world, with mutual bonds between husband, wife, and children. Concerning the home, it is also a means of dominion, which may include business, farming, invention, commerce, and so forth. So there's obviously going to be some overlap concerning areas of jurisdiction and application of all these concepts. And for an example, the church stands for truth and doctrine regarding a public policy that the state would enact through government law. Yet the home must be represented in the government through representatives that enact such a policy on behalf of those whom they represent. So all three institutions of God's created order are to work harmoniously according to God's law. So the problem is we live in a dysfunctional society, and so we don't see this working harmoniously because of sin, and because of rejection of God's created order, and because of a rejection of biblical authority. But if we were living in a society that was less dysfunctional and more biblical, we would see all three institutions, even though they are distinct and separate, they would have a harmonious with God's rule over all three. The next statement is, the individual is a part of these institutions and not an autonomous authority. Though the individual is an important part or member, which is the word Paul uses in the New Testament, and we do value each life as individuals in God's order, we are taught specifically to love our neighbor in the law, and individuals are called to faith and repentance in Christ. And we see even with these abortion ministries that are speaking out against the murder of babies, that each life is valued according to biblical worldview. And so the biblical worldview structure of covenant living is in opposition to the extremes of libertarianism, statism, and theocracy. And of course, we could have long conversations about each one of those, but just as a statement here, a foundational statement, biblical worldview and covenant view is in opposition to all three of these: libertarianism, statism, and theocracy. Now, we might prefer theonomy to theocracy as long as confusion is excluded regarding these terms. And the reason I say that is because in some circles, theonomy in its basic understanding is a fine term to use, and in other circles, theonomy can mean a lot of different things and can cause all kinds of contentions and strife within the church. And so I'm not here to be dogmatic about a specific term, other than to say what we're talking about is different than these other three examples that we find in the world. We do not affirm man's individual autonomy, the state's coercive rule over all institutions, nor the church's coercive rule over all institutions. So, before I move on, I'm going to do a little win, lose, or draw here. Is everyone with me so far? Yep. David, you good? My kids behaving? Martha? Behaving? So what I'm about to draw is going to be what I believe is the ideal framework in God's created order, with the idea of a covenantal structure permeating through it, and it'll place everything in a visual for us all, and then we can talk about it a little, and I have some things, might have some extra things to say. So bear with me here. We have Christ, the King, the crown there, and His glory. All right? And then you have the home, church, and the state. Is that legible? Big enough? Dark enough? Yeah. And so,
I can't read.
We'll put circles around them, because all three are individual institutions that God has ordained, and they're separate from each other. So, it's not a church state, and so forth. And notice that they're all in one plane. So I didn't do home, church, and state, or state, church, and home in a vertical line, but this is all in a horizontal line. And of course, Christ the King rules over each institution. And then, these are little eyes for individuals down here, which libertarians would absolutely hate, by the way. And I put little eyes on here at the bottom of the drawing. And so, what this is in opposition to is statism, theocracy, and libertarianism. And so, if you're an individual, you are important. Each person is responsible to God and has a relationship to God. And so as a father in the home, I am ruled by Christ. As a churchman, I am ruled by Christ. As a citizen, I am ruled by Christ. Also, if you're the head of the home, an elder, or a magistrate, you're still ruled by Christ. And so, if we wanted to break this down into levels of authority and responsibility and get specific with it, we could do more because we are subject to the higher powers according to God's created order, and He does create authority and accountability in each one of these. But there is a self-governance that we see in these as well. The state, constitutional, and representative. So, I'm allowed to vote, and I vote for my representative, and my representative goes to the legislation and represents me and a whole host of other individuals. And he's all supposed to do that under the rule of Christ and God's law. And so we can also put, God's law up here too. Or you could say Lex Rex, if you want to say that. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this is helpful, but when we break each one down, we can see where problems that exist in our modern time. So James and I was at a political function one time, and there were some representatives there, and an individual was pretty dogmatic and a little irate and was saying, well, he works for me. And James said, well, he works for me also. And he works for that guy over there and for her as well. And so we have to understand that, yes, there is representation, but there's a bunch of eyes down here. It's not one individual. It's the same thing in the church. The pastor serves me. Well, the pastor's serving the whole church, and he's to lead the church, and he answers to Christ for his leadership in the church. And so there's a bunch of eyes down here where we're all members one of another, and we love one another, and we serve Christ in the church. And it's not all about one individual, whether it's the pastor or a member of the congregation. And similarly in the home, even though you can see I have 3 eyes here, 4 eyes there, and 5 eyes there, so it kind of shows you the scale. A home, there's not as many members as the church, although some people have accused us of trying to start one ourselves through our 6 children. And then, of course, the state. And so, the numbers shouldn't matter so much to us as the spirits of responsibility and jurisdiction and so forth, and self-government. And so I am a priest and king in my home and lead my home, and yet I am not my home. Does that make sense? I am not an institution. The individual matters very much in the sight of God. The individual matters very much in the sight of us as ministers and as church folk. And the individual should matter in the eyes of the state as well, to protect individual rights, property, individual life, such as unborn babies. That's what it should. So the individual does matter. But it's not all about I or me, right? Well, this is what we have today. Is that's where people begin. and then it goes this way. That's the problem we have today. And with some, it's one of these deals. Right? And we don't really have to worry about theocracy anymore. Anyone doesn't really see, I don't see that as being a threat or an example that we can actually, we're not living in medieval times. Sharia, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Muslim world,
Yeah.
you would have that. Yeah, so a good example there. But in the American Christian mind, it's usually one of these other things. It's the state over everything, or me, myself, and I over everything. And that is the supreme individual, the supreme being. And these are all subsequent. And really, these are just there to get this fixed. These are just there to help. Right? So, I hope that was beneficial to you. That's the issues we're dealing with and the way people think.